Hello, boys and girls. It is time to play some catch up because some things have arrived in the mail that weren't necessarily big ticket enough to carry their own episode, but we got enough that have been built up over these last few days to where I think we can do one. But let's catch up a little bit. We all know that I have Exorcist 3, the Scream Factory with the slip. I have that already. Exorcist 2, the Scream Factory with the slip, that one's coming in the mail. And the 3-disc edition of the first one is coming in the mail as well. Now, you already saw I had the anthology, but I really hate double dipping, so what I did is I found these covers here for Exorcist the Beginning and Dominion prequel to The Exorcist. I found them on a website called Custom Maniacs, and the only one of these two that has ever had a standalone release was Exorcist the Beginning, but even that is kind of hard to find now. And I don't believe Dominion has ever had one that was on Blu-ray. It had a standalone DVD release, but these discs here, these were ones I already had, and it did take a while. I had to print off these covers on nice glossy paper. I had to cut them myself. I had to get Blu-ray cases that would actually fit, because these were still, even though I cut them, these were still kind of large, so I found these bigger, bulkier cases, and they seemed to work. But anyway, and I sold the other 3 because I didn't need them anymore, and so this way I have them all in their individual cases. They can all go on the shelf, and then when the other 2 arrive, it'll still be a complete set, but the best versions of them. So, yeah, those were ones I already had. We got a few things that came in the mail previously. We got one from Zavvi, Arrietty, which was released in the U.S. as The Secret World of Arrietty. This was a 2010 film in Japan, but it got released in the U.S. in 2012, and it was known only here as The Secret World of Arrietty, but it was known as just Arrietty everywhere else. And so this is a Region B here. The only other Zavvi steelbook that I'm waiting for is The Cabin in the Woods, the 4K of it, and so hopefully it arrives one of these days. That's the only other one. So, but yeah, I got to see this on the big screen, and I really dug it. I have to say that my Studio Ghibli collection and my experience is not as up to par with other people, but hopefully I can correct that. Now, I think you might have seen this in the collection in the standard case, but I sold it and I got the UK Steelbook of Bone Tomahawk here, which I really, really love that cover. I mean, that alone was worth it. And this is my favorite of S. Craig Zahler's, Zahler. It's my favorite of his. It's region free. It was his first one, and I still think it's his best because it helped to blend together the Western and the cannibal genres, I think, pretty expertly. And, you know, it was a really good Western. I think that it hit all the right notes that a Western should hit, but also was a satisfying cannibal film. So, yeah, it's a great fusion. And then we got a few eBay things here. We got all 3 seasons of Ash vs. Evil Dead, and so now I've got all of the Evil Dead films and TV shows, including the different cuts of the remake, and these all have their slips, which is cool. I remembered I started watching the first season when it first got released to Blu-ray, and for whatever reason, just things, other things came up and I never finished it, but I got these all back, so I'll be able to resume, because I really like the series. Who doesn't? And then with my trade-in credit, I managed to find some stuff for cheap at Second and Charles. First up was Dark City. Now, I don't know why this doesn't have like a Scream Factory or something. This is just the normal New Line Cinema release, and it's even kind of an older release at that. But this is a very, very underrated film. I mean, it has a cult following now, but it's, Alex Proyas, David S. Goyer was one of the people who helped write it, and it was Roger Ebert who really spearheaded the fandom of this thing and allowed for the director's cut to come out. And So props to him for helping to stand up for Alex Proyas's vision. This clearly owes a lot to Metropolis, but it isn't really a carbon copy in any way. And this actually came before The Matrix, but it has a lot in common with The Matrix. And but not a copy of that either, even though it didn't exist yet. It was its own. It was kind of its own animal, and so it's definitely worth a watch. It's if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I wish that this would get like a Scream Factory or something. And then next up is this is one I've always wanted to see, but I never. When I used to have it, I didn't have it with the slipcover. But Hemingway. And interesting thing with Jude Law is that because I've heard that he gives a kind of balls out performance in this, but and it's got Emilia Clarke in it, so can't go wrong there. But the thing with Jude Law that's interesting is that he doesn't usually like to be a leading man, which is interesting. He kind of prefers being a supporting actor, which if you've ever noticed the films that he's in, he tends to be the supporting actor, and he does really well with it. And because that was something that came up during his appearance on Inside the Actors Studio, was that he doesn't ever really lead films all that much, but this is a rare example where he does. So I think, hey, that's cool. And then Dumb and Dumber and The Mask, two amazing Jim Carrey films, which, what more do I even need to say about them? They're so iconic and so great in their own way. And these two plus Ace Ventura, those were 1994 was the year of Jim Carrey because all three of those were box office smashes. And they all were, all were New Line Cinema, if I recall, or New Line or Warner Brothers or whatever. And then next up, one of my all-time favorite movies, The Usual Suspects. I can't believe that I went this long without having it in the collection. I think perhaps I was maybe waiting for like a Criterion or a Shout Select or something. And if that were to happen, I would gladly sell this and get that one instead. But as of right now, this seems to be as good as it's going to get, but easily one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a shame that, Christopher McQuarrie, the screenwriter, he went on to become an even better screenwriter and become a director in his own right. It's just a shame that, with everything that happened involving Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey both, that their filmography kind of is tainted now, but even so, the work itself still holds up, and this one, it's one of my all-time favorite movies. Now, here's an underrated film that I remembered seeing a poster of in one of the theaters around here that shows more indie films, but I never saw it until years later when I managed to find it on Blu-ray for cheap. But it was Sunshine Cleaning with two of my favorite actresses, Emily Blunt and Amy Adams. This is a very unique film, I have to say. It's a comedy that's about these two sisters who are kind of, I don't know if estranged is the right word, but they're kind of sort of at odds with each other, and they both are not in a great place in their lives, and they're trying to just keep themselves afloat. Amy Adams has a son that she's trying to raise by herself, and she enlists their dad to help, played by Alan Arkin. And what is interesting about this film is that they kind of go into a little small business venture, which involves cleaning up really violent, gory, bloody crime scenes. Yeah, I think that's one of the more unique plots I've ever seen for a movie like this. And they do not skimp on the blood and the gore. Obviously, you don't see it happening, you just see the aftermath, but it's like, good on you for doing something different. Another underrated film here is Midnight Movie. Now, apparently there is like an uncut version of this, but I don't think it's seen a physical release, so this is as good as we can get as of right now. See, I tried to take off this sticky thing here, and I love Second and Charles, but they use the stickiest tape and all kinds of stickers and stuff that you don't need. And they do it to prevent, people from stealing their stuff, but still. Anyway, this is a very underrated film. It's a kind of a meta slasher film, but not in the usual, like, Scream or Cabin in the Woods sense of meta. It's a bit more literal than that, because the killer in the slasher film, he actually comes out of the movie screen and does his thing in the theater. But yeah, I think it's pretty underrated. I enjoyed it. And then Live by Night, a Ben Affleck noir film, film noir, or I guess a neo noir. But yeah, it's one that he directed, and I really like Ben Affleck as a director, and I want to see what this all entails. Can't wait to see what else he does. I know that he has had his fair share of problems with, like, alcohol and bowing out of Batman and everything. Although I guess that he is coming back along with everyone else to finish whatever new stuff they're going to put into, or whatever stuff they got to finish for the Snyder Cut of Justice League. Woo! Glad that that finally is coming out. But yeah, I think he's a very, very good director. And I've always, I'll be honest, I've always been on Team Affleck. I don't know why he got so much hate for so long. Maybe because of overexposure, because of, him having been with J-Lo, I guess. But, like, I have never understood the hate against him, and I think that, once he showed his stuff with him as a director, I think that, people really hopefully came around to kind of sort of, seeing what a talent he really was. And then, of course, people hated the fact that he was cast as Batman, and then once he actually was Batman, then he proved everybody wrong yet again. So, yeah, stop being a hater and actually have faith in people. How about that? And then, last but not least, one of my favorite recent films, not just horror films, but recent films that I've seen by a truly gifted emerging talent, is Robert Eggers with The Lighthouse. And he was the same person who did one of my other favorite horror films and favorite films of recent days, was The Witch. And this is just as good, if not in some areas. It's still a period piece, but in some areas it is a notch above The Witch, in the sense that, well, it's in black and white, so automatic 50 points right there. And it's in 4:3, so it really evokes like an old school horror film, like The Old Dark House or something that you might have seen from the old days. And, I'm an old school kind of guy, so whenever I see that, I have to give it a shout out. As rare as it is, I have to, tell people about it when it comes out. But yeah, this is a really good film. It's a unique horror film because it's more of like a psychological horror film, and it's really kind of about, well, the cabin fever that these two guys experience while they're manning this lighthouse, as well as the, I guess, some of the tales that seamen that they tell each other, like specifically related to like mermaids and Poseidon, and the sirens on the rocks, and just all the various tales that seamen and sailors have between each other over the centuries. So it utilizes that very well, and it also has a great utilization of black and white and 4:3. Okay, so we're all caught up. Now, we got a small little stack of things here. And one of them, we'll just get out of the way right now because it was from Amazon. It came earlier in the day. It was supposed to come yesterday, but it didn't. But it was Sharknado 5 Global Swarming. And, I really love the Sharknado series, and I felt bad that I only got up to 4. Sharknado The Fourth Awakens, and I never finished the series, so I went ahead and I got this one, and the last Sharknado, It's About Time, should be arriving before too long. But yeah, I really love this series, and I feel bad that I never saw it through to its rightful conclusion, but I'm about to correct that. So first up is from Alberta, Canada, and what could this be? We're gonna find out. Oh yeah, okay, I'm glad that this came. It's another Karen Gillan drama here, All Creatures Here Below, and eager to check that out. And it's a film that I don't think a lot of people have heard of, and it's something that I just kind of randomly stumbled upon, to be honest. There are a lot of films that I'll find that I just kind of blind buys if the price is reasonable, or it's something that is uncommon, something that not a lot of people are going to get, in their collections, and plus has a slipcover psychopath, as we know, and my girl Karen Gillan in it. It's like, and it's a Canadian film, so it's like, hey, it's got everything all in one. Next up is from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and this is one that I was expecting today. As you may notice, I do tend to like my underrated films, and this one I think is very underrated. This was one that I used to own, and it was another blind buy at the time, and I watched it, and I was really, I was impressed with it. I was more surprised that it did not get as much recognition as I think it should have gotten, and it wasn't really on people's radars for whatever reason. A lot of the films starring Clive Owen, I have found, tend to be that way, and this one is Intruders, and I really love that cover. I think it's really creepy. But yeah, I mean, this is not really what you would necessarily expect going in, and I think that's a very good thing. And I really love the villain in this, called Hollow Face, and it's just I don't even want to say all that much about it, but just if you can track this down either physically or on streaming or whatever, definitely give it a watch, because it's something that may take you by surprise. And it's got Daniel Bruhl in it, who you may remember as Baron Zemo from Captain America Civil War, and trying to think if there's anyone else that I recognize. But anyway, it's definitely worth it. I believe it's a Spanish horror film, but highly recommend it. I really love Clive Owen as an actor. I think he's very underappreciated. I think don't you think he would have made a good James Bond? I think so. I know he was in the running at one point. I believe at around the time that Pierce Brosnan got it in the 90s, I believe he was in the running, but I think he would have made a really good James Bond. This one is from the UK, and it is a 4K of A Simple Favor here, and for whatever reason, I specifically asked if it had the slipcover, and they said it did, but I guess it didn't. But anyway, this version of it, I got it aged because I like the cover better than the one that we see in the United States. Plus, this one has the British spelling of favor, which is kind of amusing. But this was a film that I saw with my ex-fiance, and this was her favorite film, like, ever. Like, she watched this thing obsessively, and to the point where it got, like, kind of annoying. But nonetheless, it was a very good film, obviously. A different turn for Paul Feig, and both Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively do a very good job. I like the dark humor, I like the mystery thriller aspects of it, and this was one that we saw. It was a double feature that we did of this one and of the Bradley Cooper remake of A Star Is Born. Watched that, both of those back to back, and she ended up liking this one the most, and I think partially because she played it so many times that this has kind of been burned into my brain, but it was, still a good film enough to where I wanted it in the collection again. I just wish that this had the slipcover like they said it did, but whatever. I have another one that's UK exclusive. It's Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, and I almost said Vampire Hunters, but it was Witch Hunters. That one, I assume it comes with a slipcover too, but I haven't ever seen it pop up anywhere. If I ever see the slipcover of this pop up anywhere, then I'll go ahead and grab it. But as of right now, I'll probably just keep it in the collection because, again, I haven't really seen it pop up anywhere else. And then last up, we got another controversial pick for you today. And this was one that I actually had to order from Synapse Films themselves in Franklin, MI, I believe is that in Michigan? I'm sorry, I'm bad with the state abbreviations. Yeah, this is one that I actually had to order from Zavvi's own website because I could not find this film on Blu-ray, on eBay, or on Amazon. Now, I could find it on DVD, but the whole point with upgrading is to get it in the best quality. So prepare yourselves. Controversial film coming. It's Triumph of the Will, the Leni Riefenstahl Nazi propaganda documentary, which, despite it being Nazi propaganda, and it most definitely is, it is also regarded as being one of the best films ever made, and rightfully so, because, well, it's just a breathtaking film to look at. It's one of those things that, oh, this is cool, look at that. And this is, I guess, a little thingy about the technical, yeah, about the restoration of what all they did to restore the film. And then it's got, I guess, some info about the making of the film. Because what's interesting about the way that this film was made, and it's just a little synapse booklet about other releases that they have. An interesting thing, I guess, about the making of this film is that, well, Leni Riefenstahl was one of the earliest, best-known female directors in the world. Now, there were other ones, I think, before and, during her time, but they just weren't as well known as her. And she had done some other documentaries prior to this, and but this was 1935, and this is when the Nazi Party is most definitely taking hold in Germany, and when it's pretty obvious that the propaganda is going to be disseminated very heavily throughout Germany. And so if I remember correctly, she was given rather unprecedented access to the Nazi upper echelons at the time, and I believe worked directly with Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda. And so she had unprecedented access to, well, Hitler, to the rest of the Nazi leadership at the time, and even beyond that, she was able to get her cameras into places that I don't think other documentarians had ever really done before. And so, like, if you've ever, inevitably you've seen footage from this film, even if you don't know it, because, like, you'll see, like, the famous shots of, like, all the lines of people, and, like, and these were all real events. They were all, like, speeches, or all parades or marches or whatever. And they're captured very, again, in terms of the quality of image, they're just beautifully captured. The cinematography, just the theory of editing, the kind of cutting between one shot or one sequence and another, they're all really, really well done, and it's a reason why it's so lauded. But then, of course, the other flip side of it is that, well, it is Nazi propaganda. It is, obviously, it was made with their full participation, and Leni Riefenstahl, she tried to kind of distance herself from her involvement with, well, the Nazis, and with having had to kind of be very buddy-buddy with them in order to get this done. And she tried to distance herself from it, but because of this, her career afterward never really was what it was prior to and during this. And in a weird way, it's like her having been a great filmmaker prior to this, the relationship that she had with the Nazi Party allowed for unprecedented, well, access, and also just she was able to do things as a female filmmaker at that time that, even though there were few female filmmakers at the time, and there still aren't a whole lot working, that's changing, but there aren't a whole lot even working today. But she was able to do things that I don't think a lot of other women were able to do in terms of filmmaking. So it's just a shame, of course, that such a great work of filmmaking ultimately is, Nazi propaganda. But the interesting thing, so, like, we've got, an audio commentary from Dr. Anthony R. Santoro, who's a specialist on National Socialist German history. And it's one of those things where it is Nazi propaganda, but it also does document well, where Germany was at that time and the effect that the Nazis had, the kind of the hypnotic, seductive effect that they've had on a very fragile German populace at that time, they'd been so shaken by World War One and what all they owed, the like French and other European powers, what all they owed. In the wake of the Treaty of what was it, the Treaty of Versailles, um, and they were pretty fragile, and so of course then you have a fascist movement that comes along and it seduces them like crazy. And but again, this film, it definitely shows that. It shows the power that the Nazis had and the just the sway that they had over the people at that time. Now, the question that I remembered asking myself when I watched this for the first time in college, because I was, studying filmmaking and everything, and this is it's one of those films that you just kind of have to see for similar reasons as you just have to see The Birth of a Nation, even though it's, very infamous and everything. But the question that I kept asking myself, because I think I'd seen Birth of a Nation before I watched this, the question I kept asking myself was, would this be effective propaganda nowadays? Because keep in mind that The Birth of a Nation, like, it was used as a KKK recruiting tool at the time, and I think that it's still in circulation amongst the actual, formal KKK today. Even though, again, they're very decentralized, they're not at all what they once were in terms of centralized power. Um, Amongst other aspects of the alt-right that I don't know, but Triumph of the Will, like, I kept asking myself, like, well, would this really be effective propaganda in the same way as, say, The Birth of a Nation, even though it's also very dated in terms of filmmaking and everything, because most people just don't really respond to silent films very much. But with this film, it has sound, it's documentary, but I think honestly, outside of just seeing some of the like visual power, that's on display, as powerful as the images are, I think that's about the only thing that would potentially sway a person, because if you listen to the speeches that are in the film, they're really talking about things that are not very applicable to anybody living today, because they're all about like the rights of the German worker, and just it's a lot of stuff that honestly it might have meant something to the people living at that time, but it really doesn't translate to anybody now. Um, so I mean, I don't really think it would be effective propaganda, maybe outside of the visual department, but even then, this would fit right alongside with something you might see on the History Channel, and inevitably, so much footage from this has been used in so many other things that you've probably seen a lot of footage from it, even if you don't know it. And even outside of that, like even if you've seen something as recent as Star Wars: The Force Awakens, like the speech that what's his face, the guy with red hair, cannot remember his name, with the speech that he gives to the First Order with the banners and the huge lines of stormtroopers and everything is lifted directly from this, and it's not at all unique in that department. This film has influenced so many filmmakers, even in like fiction films. And then this film also, because it was such effective Nazi propaganda at the time, then once the United States entered the war effort, after Pearl Harbor, that's when Frank Capra made his several part documentary series Why We Fight, and it was made in direct response to this film, kind of the United States' equivalent of it. And that obviously has a following in and of itself. But yeah, essential to watch if you're interested in the history of filmmaking, and especially documentary filmmaking, and if you're just interested in World War II in general. So yeah, that should catch you up a bit. We got some more cool stuff coming in the mail pretty soon, and I'll keep you up to date on that. So if you like this, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon, set phasers to stun, warp factor 5, and I will see you in the next video. And so stay safe out there.